India and China were almost at a war point at Doklam. The weeks of Himalayan standoff raised the temperatures in this region. There were even predictions that Sino-Indian confrontation will result in a kind of a disastrous situation, not just for this region, for the entire world. However, the Doklam military standoff was successfully diffused by the Indian and Chinese diplomacy. But someone who has seen the standoff at Doklam and someone who looks at the friendly camaraderie atmosphere at Wuhan, where the Indian Prime Minister met the Chinese President, obviously get a doubt what has changed in the interim period. How did India and China travel from a Doklam situation to Wuhan friendship? So what has transpired in this region is certainly a very interesting question. Well, this is not the new for India-China relations. If you look at the history, competition and complementary relations, discord and engagement were nothing new to India and China relations. There were periods of friendship, cooperation, collaboration, and there are also times of confrontation, belligerence between India and China. Well, this is nothing new. But the overall geopolitical stability and overall relations between these two large Asian giants henceforth help these two nations to come out of this kind of a confrontationist situation. So this has happened today again. Well, what was the reason why India-China relations are so to a level of a Doklam kind of a standoff? This is a result of a mistrust built over a period of time. What is the reason for this mistrust? The Chinese footprint in the South Asian region has been expanding. China's relations with Pakistan were robust right from the beginning. China has expanded its presence in Nepal, Maldives, Sri Lanka, even Bhutan, which has been relying upon India, is moving towards China, is looking towards China. Obviously, all these changes, the Chinese expanding presence, growing footprint in the India's neighborhood, were a matter of concern for India. Besides, the Chinese increasing political and economic clout in the world is seen by India as a possible threat to its security. Well, India and China has a border problem. It's a vexed question, and India and China had even military confrontation. Despite improving in the bilateral relations, there has been skirmishes, there has been serious differences between India and China. China is yet to reconcile with the fact that Arunachal Pradesh is part of India. Despite significant improvement in the India-China bilateral relations, Chinese cooperation with Pakistan, especially the military cooperation, is something which India can't digest. And more significantly, the proposed Belt and Road Initiative passes through what India feels the Pak-occupied Kashmir. It passes through Gilgit and Baltistan, which are part of Pak-administered Kashmir, as Pakistan says, and are parts of Pak-occupied Kashmir, which India believes. So therefore, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is part of the Chinese ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, is considered by India as a violation of India's sovereignty, India's sovereign claims over the Kashmir territory. So this has been the reason for India's mistrust. India has been feeling that the Chinese increased presence in the neighborhood and Chinese growing political and economic clout in the world are certainly a security challenge to India. On the other hand, what are the Chinese concerns? I told you that India's concerns over rising China. Similarly, China was also concerned about India rising India. especially China, feels that India is fast co-opted into United States strategic apparatus around China. United States is trying to build an anti-China pivot in the region, especially in the Southeast Asia, with Japan and India. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visiting Japan, an Indo-US strategic partnership, and Indian Prime Minister comment over the South China Sea dispute have certainly fueled apprehensions in China. China today feels that India is increasingly sucked into anti-China axis by the United States and Japan. And India's trilateral military exercises with the United States and Japan reinforce such a sentiment in Beijing. So India is concerned about the Chinese growing influence in the neighborhood and the world, and China is concerned about India's growing cooperation with America and Japan, especially in the Chinese neighborhood. This mistrust has aggravated the relations between China and India that ultimately led to a Doklam kind of a standoff. But what has changed since then? India and China started realizing that such kind of confrontation, such kind of adversarial relationship between the two powerful nations do not benefit either India or China. India, despite hardening its posture, despite serious antagonism or hostility toward China, failed to yield any concession from China. China has not yielded to India's concerns either at the nuclear suppliers group or in its relations with Pakistan or on the hydrological disputes. On all these counts, India could not get any concession from China despite hardening its position vis-a-vis the bilateral relations. Similarly, China did not benefit anything out of this confrontation. India remained aloof from the Belt and Road Initiative, even as the hostile nations like Japan and the United States have been softening their stand. Japan enjoys a $300 billion trade cooperation with China, and more recently Japan decided to provide case-to-case cooperation with China and the Belt and Road Initiative. US and Japanese representatives have also attended the Belt and Road Initiative meeting, which India boycotted. But China could not reconcile to the fact that one of the major neighbors of China, India, is opposed to the Belt and Road Initiative. China tried to convince India, stating that its China-Pakistan economic corridor passing through the Pak-administered Kashmir is certainly not Beijing's endorsement of Pakistan claims over Kashmir. So they clarified this position. But yet India remained stubborn on not joining the Belt and Road Initiative. So China felt that it cannot get any concessions from India. Meanwhile, the Indo-China, the trade relations between China and India remain almost stagnant, growing at a very marginal pace. India had a huge trade deficit with China. India's imports from China vastly surpass India's exports to China. So India is worried about its trade relations with China. At a time when there are geopolitical tension between India and China, the bilateral Sino-Indian trade cooperation refuses to expand, refuses to grow. So India and China thus realize that the tensions between the two nations do not actually benefit anyone. So they started realizing this. And India, despite coming closer to Japan and China and United States in their anti-China strategy, did not get any concessions from US or Japan. In fact, due to hostility with Beijing, India's bargaining power vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis US and Japan has actually come down. So when India has good relations with China, it has more better bargaining power with US and Japan. But when India's relations with China reverse, obviously that reduces India's bargaining power even with Japan and United States. Besides, Pakistan seems to be the major beneficiary of Sino-Indian hostilities. So as India-China confronted, Islamabad had a very good benefit. It has derived economic and military benefits from China. So thus, it even works against India because the militarily and economically stronger Pakistan, especially militarily stronger Pakistan, and the growing nexus between Beijing and Islamabad is certainly a matter of security concern for India. So India's hostility with China has only strengthened this nexus rather than weakening it. So thus India has realized that any prolonged or protracted confrontation with China doesn't really serve its own interest. Similarly, China has to realize that continuing non-cooperation by India will only hit at its Chinese ambitions to emerge as a regional and global power. So thus, the Doklam standoff has not only diffused, but the post-Doklam situation has now resulted in new era in the relation between India and China, with the Prime Minister Modi and President Xi meeting at Wuhan.